Welcome to The Explainer. When we talk about the death penalty, the conversation usually gets stuck on right versus wrong. But what about the hidden cost? The cost for the people who actually have to carry it out. That's what we're going to dig into. And we'll start with one person's incredible story.
So that quote you just saw, that's from Michelle Lyons. Her story is, well, it's something else. She started as a journalist and then became a public relations officer for the Texas prison system. This gave her a literal front-row seat to one of the most active execution chambers in the entire world.
And get this, over 11 years, she witnessed nearly 280 executions. Can you even wrap your head around that? For her, this wasn't some abstract political debate. It was her job. And her unique, deeply personal perspective is what gives us this incredibly rare look inside the whole machinery of death.
Okay, so that brings us to the core of it. What is the real psychological price for the people who are tasked with carrying out the state's ultimate penalty? It's a question we almost never ask, but it's absolutely central to this story.
Well, at first, Lyons had a way of dealing with it, a pretty powerful coping tool called compartmentalization. She was only 22 years old when she saw her first execution, so she told herself, it's just a job. She even admitted she'd looked down on other reporters who cried, thinking they were weak. It was a shield, right? A way to survive in a really tough, male-dominated world.
But a shield like that can't last forever. And for her, it eventually just shattered. It wasn't some big, sudden breakdown, but more of a slow, steady collapse. She describes packing all her anxieties away into a mental suitcase. The trigger that finally made it explode? Motherhood. Becoming a mother herself completely changed everything. All of a sudden, she felt this profound empathy for the mothers of the victims and also for the mothers of the condemned men. And that weight, it just became unbearable.
And here's the thing. Lyons wasn't alone in feeling this, not by a long shot. Inside the Texas prison system, the staff had their own ways of coping with the immense pressure, and those methods were often informal and pretty dark.
This really reveals a shared, global experience of isolation. In Texas, you had gallows humor, people were literally betting on the time of death, and a lot of heavy drinking. Now, if you look at research from Taiwan, you see that correctional officers are basically taught to cope alone. They're forced to adapt their own personal values just to enjoy the burden. So in both places, the system offers no real formal support. All that trauma has to be managed privately through these unofficial and often destructive means.
This isn't just burnout or PTSD. Experts actually have a specific name for it: moral injury. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the deep psychological wound that forms when your job forces you to participate in, or even just witness, something that violates your most fundamental moral beliefs.
So this internal, personal cost, it often points to a wider decay within the institution itself. Think about it. A system that harms its own people is often a system that's hiding something.
When Lyons first started, her mentor, a guy named Larry Fitzgerald, was all about transparency. He really believed the media was there to be the public's eyes and ears. But then, new leadership came in, and that whole culture just evaporated. It was replaced by a wall of secrecy and a new motto: no news is good news.
And what we see here is a very deliberate dismantling of public accountability. First, the new leadership restricts information. Then, a politician gets angry about one inmate's stunt, and the entire last meal tradition is abolished just like that. After Lyons left, the secrecy got even tighter, limiting media access and even hiding where they were getting the lethal injection drugs from.
For Lyons, just trying to uphold those old principles of transparency came at an immense personal cost. She refused to spin stories for politicians, and for that, she was targeted. She was accused of misconduct in what she describes as a bungled hit, designed just to push her out. It really reveals a toxic kind of culture, one that punishes integrity and is terrified of scrutiny.
So, if the system is this secretive and flawed, what does that really say about the justice it delivers? This is where the personal doubts of the witnesses start to become a profound critique of the entire process.
Cases like Napoleon Beasley's, who was executed for a crime he committed as a teenager, created deep moral doubt. He was seen as smart and genuinely remorseful. And his final words, "No one wins tonight, no one gets closure," they haunted Lyons. It made her question whether she was witnessing objective justice or just an arbitrary exercise of state power.
And that experience directly blows up one of the most common justifications for the death penalty: the idea that it provides closure for victims' families. Lyons and her colleagues saw the reality up close.
Sure, some families felt satisfaction, but many, many more just collapsed emotionally, realizing that the execution didn't heal their pain. It was often, as one official put it, simply the beginning of the next ugly chapter.
So when you look at who is actually being executed, a really disturbing pattern emerges. And what's wild is that if you compare the observations from Texas with academic research in Taiwan, the profiles are strikingly similar. In both places, inmates overwhelmingly come from impoverished backgrounds, they have low levels of education, and they struggle with addiction. And this data is a core part of the debate that's happening in Taiwan today. Is the death penalty truly about justice, or does it disproportionately fall on the most disadvantaged?
Which raises a really critical question, doesn't it? Is capital punishment truly reserved for the worst of the worst, or is it a punishment for those who just can't afford a powerful legal defense? The data strongly suggests that it often functions as a kind of class punishment, hitting the most vulnerable in society the hardest.
Okay, so given all of these deep-seated issues, the psychological trauma, the institutional decay, the social inequity, what are the alternatives? And how can we think differently about what justice truly means?
Well, a really powerful argument comes from inside the system itself. Larry Fitzgerald, the same man who once defended the Texas system, now testifies against the death penalty. He argues that our modern maximum security prisons are perfectly capable of containing any inmate for life. We can ensure public safety without resorting to execution.
This all suggests that a healthier approach to justice might require a big shift in focus. First, you have to address the root causes of crime: poverty, education, addiction. Second, you have to make it clear that there are safe alternatives to execution. And finally, we need to move our public conversation beyond the simple and, as we've seen, often false promise of revenge.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. When a system that's designed to deliver the ultimate justice is secretive, arbitrary, and inflicts profound harm on everyone it touches, from the condemned to the executioners themselves, we have to ask ourselves, is a healthy society built on the severity of its punishment or on the integrity of its entire justice system? When we demand justice, what are we really asking for?